Hey guys, this is Hell Hades. This is a Raid Shadow Legends video, but with a bit of a difference. I've got a special guest on the channel today, and we're going to be talking about dev leaks, or what we're allowed to talk about anyway. Nub Raids, welcome to the channel. How you doing?
Oh, it's good. I'm glad to be on. You know, I love watching the Fateless leaks that you like to put out. So now I'm part of the raid leaks as well. It's nice.
Yeah. And often in the Fateless leaks, I talk about stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about. So I'm hoping that all the stuff we talked about today is actually allowed.
Yeah.
So I guess just to sort of tee this up, there will be a part 1 right here, right now, and then there's going to be a part 2 over on Nub Raid's channel, which I will link down below. Make sure you drop that man a sub at the same time. But we're going to have quite an in-depth conversation here about a session we had with the Raid developers yesterday. And it was actually the second one of these sessions that we've had. So we had one around Christmas. Then we've had another one nearly 6 months on. I guess firstly, how did you find the session? And, what do you think about this one versus last one?
Yeah, I thought this one actually went better, right? I think it's often the way. It's like the first time doing things, you're trying to find your feet a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think the first time we did it, I think there was, a little bit of tension between the devs and the content creators. I thought it was much more chill this time around. Like the devs seemed much more relaxed. They're like, oh, okay, if we talk about this stuff with the CCs, it's the game's not going to fall apart and community won't hate us and all of that. And the CCs were, I think, more chill as well. So I think it ended up being a good conversation. And it's actually a really cool thing that this is going to be a recurring thing that we're going to get to do, is to chat to the devs, give feedback directly. They're asking for feedback directly from us. It's part of why they're doing the call, is to talk face to face and see what we actually think in person. And then they want us to know what they're actually thinking. So I think it's awesome, actually. It's great.
I would say my biggest critique, so I did a wrap-up video last time. My biggest critique was it felt like whenever we offered a suggestion or, we asked them a question about a specific thing, I felt like they were quite defensive in their answers last time, or there was certainly a defensive undertone. I don't know if they ever meant for that to be the case, but it definitely felt that way to me. Whereas this time, I think, like you say, it was more just a conversation, and we're all adults here, and we know that things can't just change overnight with stuff. So, and it's worth saying as well, since the last one that we did, I do feel like there's been some stuff that we talked about which has already come in. And whether that was already planned or not, it's hard to know. But, things like quality of life improvements in the tavern was something we spoke about quite a bit. Things like epic empowerment. In the last conversation, they pretty much said, we don't think that's something we would do.
I think they did, because when I was over recording the Raid Community Awards and I got to speak to them, they said, actually, following on from that conversation, there was something. They didn't tell me what, but they said there was at least one thing that we were never going to do. And after the conversation, we thought about it for a bit, and then we actually changed our minds and said, you know what? Okay, let's actually do it. I think that epic empowerment was the thing that happened because of this talk, which is... It's cool. I think it's good as well that they will change their mind on things if if it makes sense, and if they talk to us or the community and go, oh well, people really want something or don't want something. Okay, we'll actually take that on board.
Yeah, and what was interesting as well, so they didn't open the session with, okay, these are the things we've done, these are the things we've planned. It was more just, how do you feel about the game, and how does your community feel about the game right now? Like what sort of sentiment are you getting back? And I think because we've had a couple of, I'd say quite decent wins from a community point of view in terms of patches, and I'm sure there'll be comments down below now saying, what do you mean? The game's more pay to win than ever. And yeah, none of that stuff's gone away, but there are now, I think, some fun enhancements that have come in for more like the more average player. And I feel like sentiment is in a good spot for... for Raid Shadow Legends compared to, if I went back 6 months when we first had this chat, where probably it wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things as well where this is often a low point in the year, right? I feel like the peak of sentiment is usually around probably June or July when there's new content, and then Christmas when there's new content. And then it's at a real low point in usually this time of year, April or May or November, right? When it's been ages since the last content. So people are just naturally bored. They're waiting for the new big thing and it hasn't been revealed yet. I do feel like it's been pretty darn positive this year, actually. Certainly compared to November last year, where I think people were absolutely really, really negative about the game, massively
Yeah,
so at
for
that
sure.
point.
Yeah.
Um, they have been doing better overall. They've made some mistakes for sure, but they've been doing better overall this year. I think, yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it then. Let's talk about some of the different discussion points. I guess we start with probably the juiciest big one that we all wanted to talk about. And let's talk about Hydra Clash, and let's talk about champion nerfs, stroke changes, or, that type of stuff. And I mean, I did a video about this recently where it just feels insane that, certain teams in Hydra Clash specifically are just like dominating by so much. Okay. And we talked about Trunda teams. We talked about Trunda with Yumiko. There's now kind of like Yannicka teams coming up. And Raid's biggest strength, I think, is also proving to be a bit of a downfall in terms of champions having really fun, unique abilities, unique kits, and then the community kind of big brains just totally demolishing the game by finding some of these funny interactions.
Yes.
So, I mean, do you want to talk to perhaps, some of the thoughts from the dev team around, specifically, I guess, Trunda. Trunda was one that we spoke about a bit of length, but also just generally around Hydra Clash, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, one of their general points, which I think is good and is actually, I think, different from what they said before, where before they said, we are not going to nerf Trunda because it's a difficult team to build. You need a lot of legendaries, etc. We're not going to change it. It seems to me that they're considering changing that now, where that they've basically said, we don't want like any one champion to be dominating any game mode. So it's quite a general thing, right? It's not targeting a specific champion, though. Obviously, Trunda would be the most impacted because she is the most dominant champion for Hydra Clash. But I think it's actually a good move overall, and I think I much rather this world where they go back on something they said before, where we won't nerf Trunda, to be like, okay, actually maybe she does need to be nerfed because they want a more balanced game where there is more variety. I prefer that to being stuck in a world where, because it's gonna keep coming up. Like for example, with the Yannicka thing, right? I saw people saying, oh, well, if you just nerf Yannicka, it's fixed. Well, I think Bronco just put out a video yesterday, I think, where now you can grow the shields with an Acelin and an Ironclad. Acelin rips off the shields, which doesn't do much damage, but it heals you from a huge amount. Then Ironclad explodes it. So there's constantly going to be these insane teams. So yeah, it's very interesting. They're trying to talk about doing. I think they want to change stuff where it's quite a general way, so it's not targeting specific champions and having to constantly nerf specific champs, but rather, like, one of the questions they were asking was, should we have shields scaling up so large in the game? I'm curious what you think about it. But that's a question that they're grappling with, is like, that could be something that they could change, because Cadaver was also crazy. Like, there's gonna keep having champions like this that do crazy things when you can have such crazy scaling. What do you think about it?
Well, I think anything which has got infinite scaling in a game like this has got the ability to be abused, right? Eventually, if infinite and actually we've seen it a number of times. So we've seen infinitely unkillable, and that basically broke their game. They've had to put mechanics into for almost every new boss to say, oh, actually, you can't use unkillable here. You've got infinite scaling shields. They only ever had Brogni that could do it, but they realized it was a problem, especially when people start to really put their mind to it. And now they put out Wixwell that does the same thing, but honestly, in a different way, but actually a more of a broken way. You've got Acelin infinite scaling damage through healing, which no one would have expected, but then obviously Ironclad's in the game. So I think anything which has got that infinite scale potentially is a problem with this style of game. It's just it's just going to be a problem. So I guess for me, that's a bit of a worry that they've called out the infinite scale. So they specifically said, should there be infinitely scaled shields in the game? And that'll fix a number of the things we've just spoken about if they took that away. But it would hard break, the new champion that everyone's just picked up. which we all chose as kits, and that type of stuff. And honestly, it wouldn't solve anything to do with some of the other Hydra Clash issues. What was quite interesting is they spoke about doing like A/B testing, and they've said, oh, we've tried in our own in-house testing doing a nerf of Trunda. If we nerf just Trunda's kit, does that change the game? And she was still doing way more damage than other champs. They tried, what about if Yumiko cannot reset Yumiko? Well, we've already kind of moved on from that because people have found different ways to do it. So
they said they looked into changing how the points work as well for Hydra Clash. So that's something that they're looking into. It's almost all the suggestions you've seen from the community on how to fix Hydra Clash. They have been looking into almost all of them, which is good. I will say it feels a bit slow,
Slow,
that's the thing. You're going to have to wait, it seems like a long time for any of these changes to come in. So that would be something I think that they could hopefully look at improving, because like, my goodness, the balance, like if we look at even at PvP, right? Taras Mariska dominated for so long. It's not a problem anymore, but my goodness, it took a long time to get there. Or Polymorph 6-star in Arena, how dominant that is for so long. It seems like the balance changes are very slow.
Yeah. And they spoke specifically around Armands. And I guess the big takeaway is they said, or they didn't say they were going to nerf anyone. Like there was no nerf talk in terms of, and we did ask quite directly, are any of these champions up for a nerf? And they said no, but they are aware that some champions are kind of either overtuned or breaking the game to certain degrees. And it does feel like at the moment, plans like for Armands, there are some counters out there, and they're planning to launch things which help to counter someone like an Armands even more, like more champions with an intercept buff, for example. I mean, what's your view on just bringing new stuff in to counter versus amend champions that feel OP?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a conceit of the genre, really, right? They don't want to nerf stuff because it's a gotcha game, right? People spend potentially real money and certainly spend an awful lot of time and effort acquiring and building champions. So to come in and nerf them feels really bad. I mean, I call it a conceit because at the same time, it's very inefficient, right? Like you've got a champion that's clearly overpowered. The sensible thing is to just nerf that one champion. People like to say buffs, no nerfs. It's like, do we buff 800 champions instead of just nerfing one? That seems quite silly. So I think bringing in like new stuff to counter broken stuff, I mean, it does keep, and they talked about that as well, this idea of an evolving metagame, right? It does keep a metagame evolving, and it's also really difficult to balance stuff, like to nerf stuff well. If you want to do that, that's really tough too, and not kill strategies to nerf them the right amount. It's very easy to get that
and often
wrong.
it's small, right? So often these nerfs, I mean, you've played Heroes of the Storm a lot. In that style of game, there's kind of like small buffs and small nerfs all the time, but then you probably haven't just spent best part of $1,000 or something to get that hero and to give them their kit. So that's where the frustration comes in with this style of game.
In other games, like a 5% damage nerf is considered absolutely massive. Like, oh my god, you've just completely changed the viability of this champion. Like Trunda is doing 15 times the team damage of other teams. Like if you lowered her by 5%, it wouldn't make a dent. She'd be 14 times the damage. It's so there's a funny problem of scale here as well. But that's it. I mean, look, like Taras Mariska, I think that bringing in mythicals, and I think the power creep there, I think bringing in Narses and Ancora has basically fixed the Taras Mariska problem. Like, I don't really think that for Arena, their problem, I think Taras is like too strong generally compared to other HP nukers. It's a bit silly, but they're not really a problem like they were for like a year. But
no, true. There's now counters out there but the counters out there are
hard to get,
and they're bound to be, but they're very difficult to get. So like the counters now coming out are generally either mythical or at least void legendary. And I guess one thing that came out, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but they did say there's not void mythicals on the horizon. So that's one thing that.
Because I think I've seen lots of us speculating that they could come out at the end of the year or something like that. But That's probably just as well that they're not going to bring out void mythicals, but does raise
Yeah,
an interesting question of like, what are we going to get? Like, what big? Because they love adding, right? Don't they? Like, oh,
yeah.
now you've got stuff to ascend your gear, and now you've got primal shards. You've got this new stuff. Like, there's bound to be another new currency, like
Well, yeah, they need to keep
soul sprinkles or
evolving
something.
in
Like,
some way,
what's
don't
going
they?
to come
This
next?
is it. Um, I mean, one of the questions which I asked, or certainly I spoke about,
Mm,
is dungeons and dungeon divers, and this kind of like frustration. I think that because we've now got this rotation of fusion into sort of Titans event into something else. There's always a big
mm.
thing to do now, and some people love that. Some people find it a bit just tiring. A bit like fatigue sets in, that you feel like you constantly got to be at the height of the game. Grinding. But I did say that some people just want to run some Minotaur, or
Mm.
or perhaps some Sand Devil or some Phantoms or whatever. And it feels weird that even though this is a dungeon, it doesn't support things like dungeon divers. So
Yeah.
if it was helping towards dungeon divers, then at least it feels like you're getting some benefit whilst you're trying to scale up your champs.
Yeah.
I thought it was quite an interesting answer to this one.
Yeah, I was cracking up when they were like, yeah, that dungeon divers and Tag Arena was one as well. They're like,
Yeah,
that's a localization problem. Like, I don't know what it's called in Ukrainian, but they're like, oh, well, it dungeon divers is supposed to be about getting gear from dungeons, which is why, or just getting gear, I should say,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
why it doesn't apply to these other dungeons. So it's like they were bringing up like, and it was more of a genuine question, like, is it a naming problem? Or is it a gameplay problem? Like, should it be changed to like gear divers, or should it be called dungeon divers? And like you said, they expand it. I actually think it's a bit of a gameplay problem.
Mm,
Well, I think there's two facets to it. I think there's probably no harm, honestly, in adding in, as you said, Minotaur, etc. In, and I think a big problem with dungeon divers comes from, in my opinion, just how high the points are right now.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
I think if the points were much lower, it wouldn't really be a problem that it's just for gear. And like if it was called gear divers with half the points, you'd be like, okay, that's fine. That's actually kind of fun. I'm forced to go grind some gear every now and then. Okay, I'm cool with that. But then I am free to do what I want. I think the problem is that you've got dungeon divers, but it's only gear dungeons, and you've got to just grind them like twice over. Like, is a dragon
yeah.
tournament at the same time? You got to double the points to get dungeon divers close to done for a fusion, which is
And
crazy.
there's also something which we didn't even bring up yesterday, but
Hmm.
dungeons are so low value in terms of gear
Yes.
now compared to the game. Like the game's moved on.
Mm.
All of these
I've been
old
thinking
gear
about that, yeah.
sets. I mean, and I've spoken to a bunch of people that did the free to play challenge this year,
Mm.
and the people that basically achieved highest. Most of them just said like, there's no value in
Yeah.
running dungeons anymore. Like you get your gear from Doom Tower, you get your gear from Hydra, all of these other kind of avenues, Sintranos. They
Yeah.
basically have all got sets which or faction ones, I guess. They've all got sets that do the same type of thing, but now just a bit better. So and it's not using all your energy to do it and stuff. So that's the other issue is that Dungeon Divers is so inefficient for your energy now. I would much rather be doing Sand Devils or Minnow
Exactly.
runs or Iron
Yeah.
Twins because that's more valuable for an account. But
Yeah.
I guess that's another problem.
That's it. I was thinking about that afterwards as well, 100%. The dungeon artifacts are just quite bad. They did talk about, obviously they increased the dungeon levels before, and
Yeah,
that it's something that they probably will do again, but not in the short term.
yeah,
But that they will do again. Like, I think something they could look into doing is, I don't know what you think about. Like, they could remove some of the really bad sets from the dungeons, just like cut them in half and just have the half more well received sets, or they could have some sort of rotation. They could add new sets in, like add in some of the Forge Pass sets or something.
yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know.
Yeah, it does feel like that's kind of.
Yeah.
I don't think they will do that, but it does feel like that's the
No.
direction they should go. Is like some sets just kind of need to be.
Yeah. Like, who
Can you
wants
delete them?
offense
Because
set?
then you've got gear to delete. Like there's so many small additional problems that come with just making what you
Yeah.
think should be an easy change. Like, do we
Mhm,
really just
mhm.
need like the HP set anymore?
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff like that. It just that's
I
so
do think
bad.
they should consider switching up the sets. Whenever they do new levels of the dungeons, I think they should update the set drop so it becomes more
Yeah,
appealing.
almost like I mean, I guess you could just say, all right, well, hard, you don't get any of these, or maybe you only get like a couple of these old
Yeah.
sets now, and like you say, you put in things like forge sets or
Mm.
or things like the I guess in channel sets, I don't know, but ultimately just something which is a bit more interesting. And to what you said there, so they spoke about not wanting to extend dungeons, so they've kind of done that relatively recently, but they did talk about some other areas where they felt like there could be some interesting new content.
Just really cool.
Faction Wars was one of the ones, and I thought actually, I would be on board with that. I would be on board with some sort of fun, hard next kind of like stages to Faction Wars with some good rewards. How did you feel?
I would love it. I mean, honestly, for me, progressing through Faction Wars was one of the most fun bits of content in the game for me. I love it. You're using a bunch of champions you wouldn't otherwise. It also fits in with these faction unities, right? And the mythicals.
Yeah.
That, oh, I've got one for that faction. Great. I can smash through the faction crypt now. But the faction crypts are quite easy by the time you're at the point, I would think, of getting faction unity or mythicals usually. So yeah, I think it would be brilliant. Yeah, definitely. And especially because the factions are so much more fleshed out nowadays than they were back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, guys, that is going to be it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to go and check out the second part on Nubraid's channel down below. We'll see you soon.